Some murders never die. They just go quiet, waiting in the dark, sealed in evidence boxes, sleeping inside the fibers of old clothing and forgotten photographs. But time has a strange way of speaking. Imagine living half a lifetime not knowing who took your mother, your brother, your child. Imagine burying them, growing old, and then one day, long after hope has faded, the phone rings. The voice on the other end says, "We've found him." That's what tonight's story is about, those rare, haunting moments when justice finally arrives, but too late for those who needed it most. This is Criminal Minds Archives. And tonight, we open the files of time itself. Justice after death, cold cases solved too late. These are the stories where truth waited for decades, where families aged in silence, evidence gathered dust, and technology became the only witness left. Some killers died before they could stand trial. Some victims never saw their names cleared. Yet somehow, against the odds, the truth emerged long after everyone had stopped listening. Our journey begins in Omaha, Nebraska. It's the autumn of 1978. A quiet apartment complex. An elderly man found dead in his bed, his living room ransacked. The scene, brutal but oddly calculated. The killer leaves behind a trail so faint it would take 33 years and the invention of forensic DNA to expose him. This is the story of Carroll Bonnet and the long road that led to justice after death. Omaha, Nebraska. October 17, 1978. In a quiet brick apartment building on South 49th Avenue, neighbors begin to notice something strange. A thin smell, faint at first, creeping from beneath the door of apartment number 10. Inside that apartment lived a man named Carroll Bonnet, 61 years old, soft-spoken, polite. He worked as a credit clerk at a local furniture store. A man of routine, never late, never rude, never absent without reason. So when Carroll failed to show up for work one morning, his co-workers were immediately uneasy. Hours turned into a full day. The manager called his apartment, no answer. When the police were finally called, the maintenance man unlocked the door. What they found inside would haunt investigators for decades. The apartment was in disarray, drawers pulled open, papers scattered, furniture overturned. At first glance, it looked like a burglary gone wrong. But the truth was much darker. In the bedroom, officers found Carroll Bonnet lying on his bed, a blanket drawn halfway over him. His body was still. His chest bore a single stab wound, deliberate, deep, precise. The pillow beside him was soaked with blood. On the nightstand, an overturned lamp. And next to it, a torn piece of paper towel. Detectives would later say it was as if the killer had tried to tidy the scene, wiping away prints, but then stopped. Outside, Carroll's car, a 1966 Pontiac Catalina, was gone. Inside, his wallet and keys were missing. A robbery, maybe. But there were things that didn't fit. The front door hadn't been forced. The attack seemed personal, almost quiet. The police dusted the apartment for fingerprints. They collected cigarette butts from an ashtray, even though Carroll didn't smoke. And on the bathroom counter, they found something small, something the killer probably didn't even realize he'd left behind. A used bandage. The kind you'd use after cutting yourself. It had dried blood on it. No one could have guessed that this tiny scrap would one day unlock the entire mystery. For weeks, detectives chased leads across Omaha. Carroll's car was eventually found abandoned in Council Bluffs, Iowa, just across the river. Inside, cigarette butts and a few scattered papers from his apartment, but no sign of the killer. Witnesses described seeing a young man driving the car, but nobody knew who he was. The case stalled. Months became years. Detectives retired. Files were boxed and shelved. Carroll Bonnet's murder joined the long, lonely list of unsolved homicides. His family died never knowing the truth. His name faded from newspapers, from public memory, until it became just another cold case number. 33 years later, in 2011, a new generation of investigators at the Omaha Police Department decided to re-examine their oldest files. Inside one of those faded boxes under brittle paperwork and yellowed photos, A detective found a small envelope marked bandage from bathroom bonnet case. He sent it to the state crime lab for DNA testing. When the results came back, they revealed a full genetic profile, something impossible to achieve back in 1978. That profile was uploaded into the national database. And within days, it hit a match. The DNA belonged to a man named Jerry Watson. Watson was 17 years old at the time of Carroll's murder, a troubled teenager who'd been in and out of juvenile facilities. He'd been arrested years later for unrelated crimes and was now serving time in a Nebraska prison. When detectives confronted him, he didn't deny knowing about the case. He claimed he'd broken into the apartment to steal, that Carroll had surprised him, and that the stabbing was an accident. But the wound was too precise to be an accident. The scene too deliberate. The cleaning too methodical. Jerry Watson was charged and later convicted of the 1978 murder of Carroll Bonnet. At his sentencing, the courtroom fell silent. There was no family left to speak for Carroll, no relatives to read a statement, no one to cry or curse at the man who'd taken his life. The prosecutor's voice echoed through the nearly empty courtroom. She said, "This is not justice delayed. This is justice preserved." The truth had waited 33 years long after Carroll's death certificate, long after his parents and siblings had been buried beside him. The DNA had waited. It had endured decades of dust and silence, holding the story only it could tell. And when the technology finally caught up, that little piece of bandage spoke louder than any witness ever could. Carroll Bonnet never lived to see his killer named, but the evidence he left behind made sure the truth outlived them both. As one detective said years later, "Sometimes the dead tell us everything, we just have to learn how to listen." And so we move forward from Nebraska to Long Island, New York, to another story of justice that arrived too late, where innocence was stolen not once, but twice. It was the night of November 10th, 1984, in the seaside town of Lynbrook, Long Island. The streets were quiet, the kind of cold, wind-brushed night when you could hear the ocean whispering against the shore. 16-year-old Theresa Fusco should have been home by 10 p.m. She worked part-time at a roller rink called Roller Castle, just a few blocks from her house. She loved music, loved to skate, and dreamed of studying cosmetology after high school. That night, she finished her shift, said goodbye to her friends, and started the short walk home. She never made it. When Theresa's mother, Carol Fusco, woke up the next morning and found her daughter's bed empty, she knew something was terribly wrong. Theresa was responsible. She wasn't the type to stay out late or disappear without a call. Carol went straight to the Lynbrook Police Department. She filed a missing persons report and begged officers to search the route between Roller Castle and their home. For days, volunteers scoured parks, alleys, and wooded lots. Flyers went up. Television news covered the case. And then, 12 days later, a hunter found a body tangled in brush near a wooded area behind an old restaurant less than half a mile from where Theresa had last been seen. It was Theresa. Her body was partially covered by leaves. She'd been sexually assaulted and strangled with a piece of fabric torn from her own clothing. Investigators found a hair, a few fibers, and faint tire tracks nearby. But DNA testing was still years away, and the evidence couldn't speak, not yet. Pressure from the community was mounting. The murder of a teenage girl in a small town had everyone on edge. Detectives needed answers, and fast. Weeks later, police brought in several local young men, all friends or acquaintances from the roller rink scene. Among them were John Restivo, Dennis Halstead, and John Kogut. They were in their early 20s, working-class guys, a little rough around the edges, but not violent. Detectives claimed they had evidence linking them to the crime. The truth was, they didn't. Over hours of grueling interrogation without lawyers, without sleep, the young men were pressured to confess. John Kogut eventually broke. His confession was full of errors, timelines that didn't match, and details only detectives had mentioned. Still, prosecutors presented it as fact. The three were convicted of Theresa Fusco's rape and murder in 1986. Kogut received a life sentence. Restivo and Halstead were each given 50 years to life. For nearly 2 decades, the men sat behind bars, proclaiming their innocence. Theresa's mother believed the case was closed. She tried to move on, believing justice had been served. But something about it never felt right. There were inconsistencies evidence that didn't match any of the men. A single hair recovered from the victim's body that belonged to someone else. And as the 1990s turned into the 2000s, forensic science began to change everything. DNA testing was now capable of doing what eyewitnesses and confessions could not: tell the truth. In 2003, attorneys from the Innocence Project requested DNA testing on all the evidence preserved from the Fusco case. When the results came back, they shattered the original investigation. The semen, the hair, the fibers. None of it matched Kogut, Halstead, or Restivo. Not a single trace of their DNA was found on or near Theresa's body. The truth was undeniable. The wrong men had spent nearly 20 years in prison for a murder they did not commit. Their convictions were vacated. 2 of the men awarded more than $18 million for wrongful imprisonment. Their freedom proved justice had been rushed, not righted. But the story didn't end there. In 2024, Nassau County investigators quietly opened a new line of inquiry, a line that would lead to Richard Bilodeau, a man who had lived just a mile from the roller rink at the time of the crime. In February, Bilodeau left a discarded cup and straw at a smoothie cafe in Suffolk County. Detectives retrieved them, sent them to the lab, and the DNA results shook the decades-old case. The profile from the straw matched the DNA extracted from Theresa's body. In October 2025, a grand jury indicted Richard Bilodeau, now 63, on 2 counts of murder. Bilodeau pleaded not guilty, but when asked by prosecutors about his involvement, he allegedly shrugged and said, "Yeah, people got away with murder back then." This time, though, the evidence doesn't lie. Science has spoken across 40 years. Theresa's father, Thomas Fusco, stood beside prosecutors at the arraignment, clutching a photo of his daughter and saying simply, "I never gave up hope." The past hasn't been forgotten, and now her case is no longer cold. Theresa Fusco's case reminds us that time may blur memories, but it sharpens the truth. A single straw left on a cafe table, that was all it took to break a silence 4 decades long. But sometimes the truth doesn't come from something newly dropped. Sometimes it comes from evidence that's been waiting, quietly, in a box no one opened for years. Our next story takes us back even further to 1972, on a quiet college campus in Terre Haute, Indiana. A young woman disappeared after a sorority event. Her father would be the one to find her, and the evidence that would one day reveal her killer. But like so many stories in this archive, the name came too late. Terre Haute, Indiana, September 15, 1972. A college campus should feel safe classrooms, late-night study sessions, friends walking to cars under lamplight. That night, the ordinary comfort of an Indiana State University campus was shattered. 19-year-old Pamela "Pam" Milam left a sorority event and never came home. The next day, her father found her. Pam's own car, the trunk closed and locked, held the terrible answer. She was inside bound, strangled. Her life ended before dawn. The campus and the town were stunned. There were no witnesses who could put a name to the horror. For decades, Pam's file sat in cold storage, evidence preserved, questions preserved, hope dimmed but not extinguished. Detectives collected what they could: cord, duct tape, clothing, fibers, the precise threads of a life torn away. Back then, forensic tools were limited: circumstantial leads, witness statements, and long nights of arduous detective work. Over the years, other suspects were considered. Names were raised and fell away. A man named Robert Wayne Austin was at one point investigated and later ruled out after testing, but the real trail remained stubbornly silent. The family waited. The community waited. The evidence waited. Then the science changed. As DNA and genealogy matured, cold cases across the country began to breathe again. Investigators in Terre Haute turned to these new tools and to a team experienced in building family trees from fragments of DNA. In May 2019, authorities announced a breakthrough. Genetic genealogy pointed to a man named Jeffrey Lynn Hand as the likely source of the DNA profile found on Pam's blouse and related evidence. Hand, who died in 1978 during a violent confrontation with law enforcement, had a violent history investigators say fit the pattern. The DNA was the link, the silent witness that waited nearly half a century before speaking. There would be no trial, the suspect was already dead. Still, the identification mattered. For Pam's family, the revelation was a jagged relief and answer that answered some questions and reopened others. The truth did not return what was taken, but it finally put a name next to a face. It closed a chapter that had hung open for generations. Investigators said the original evidence had been preserved well, a detail that proved decisive. What was left in a paper bag in an evidence locker became the voice of a woman who could no longer speak. Pamela Milam's case shows us something devastating, that sometimes a killer's name survives only in the evidence they leave behind. 47 years passed before investigators could finally say it aloud. Science had delivered the truth, but long after it could change anything for Pamela herself. And as painful as that is, our next case is even harder, because it involves a child. A little girl whose disappearance shattered an entire community in Ontario. A case that led police down the wrong path for years, destroying an innocent man's life. While the real killer lived free, crossing paths with neighbors, families, and children who never knew the danger beside them. It would take 36 years for the truth to break through, and when it did, it shook the country. Queensville, Ontario, October 3rd, 1984. The air was cool and crisp, carrying that familiar smell of falling leaves and wood smoke. 9-year-old Christine Jessop was waiting for a ride home from school. She was a bright, smiling girl, full of energy, always curious. That morning, her mother had taken her younger brother, Ken, to Toronto for a hospital visit. Christine came home from school around 3:30 p.m. She changed into her play clothes and told a neighbor she was heading to the park to meet a friend. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. By nightfall, panic had set in. Christine's parents returned home to find her missing. Police officers and volunteers searched through the night, combing the fields, the school grounds, and the wooded trails near their neighborhood. For days, there was nothing, no clues, no witnesses, no trace of where the 9-year-old had gone. The town of Queensville was paralyzed with fear. Then, nearly 3 months later, on December 31st, a farmer in Sunderland, about 50 kilometers away, stumbled upon a horrific scene. In a field near a remote road, partially buried beneath leaves and debris, were the remains of Christine Jessop. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed multiple times. Her clothing was torn, her small silver necklace still hung around her neck. The news devastated the town. The Jessops were a modest, close-knit family, ordinary people, caught in an unimaginable nightmare. For Christine's mother, Janet, and her father, Bob, every sunrise became a reminder that their daughter was gone. The community wanted answers, and the police, under enormous pressure, needed someone to blame. The investigation turned toward a familiar face, Guy Paul Morin, the Jessops' next-door neighbor. He was quiet, reserved, and lived alone. In a small town still reeling from fear, his solitude made him stand out. Detectives convinced themselves that Morin's odd behavior must be guilt. They searched his home, seized belongings, even claimed they had found fibers matching those from the crime scene. Despite a lack of direct evidence, no DNA, no confession, Morin was charged with the rape and murder of Christine Jessop in 1985. He maintained his innocence from day one. But the tide of public outrage had already turned against him. Morin was tried and acquitted once, but prosecutors appealed, and in 1992, a second jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. For Christine's family, it seemed like justice had been served. But deep down, something felt wrong. The evidence had gaps, the timeline didn't add up. And then, just a few years later, science would do what the justice system could not. In 1995, new DNA testing methods became available in Canada. The biological evidence collected from Christine's clothing was re-examined. When the results came back, they were absolute. The DNA did not belong to Guy Paul Morin. It was a different man entirely. Morin was immediately exonerated after spending more than a decade fighting for his life. The Ontario Court of Appeal formally apologized. The case against him collapsed, but Christine's murder was once again unsolved. Her parents, already destroyed by grief, had to relive it all. The file sat in storage, occasionally reopened, but with no solid leads. Until 2020, when technology that hadn't even existed in 1984 finally gave Christine her voice back. Using forensic genetic genealogy, investigators from the Toronto Police Service and the Ontario Centre of Forensic Sciences analyzed the original DNA sample from Christine's clothing. The genetic markers led them to a family tree and then to a single name, Calvin Hoover. Hoover had been an acquaintance of the Jessop family, a friend of Christine's father. He'd worked as an auto mechanic and was known to be quiet and polite. But behind that mild exterior was something no one could have imagined. Police uncovered that Hoover had taken his own life in 2015. When they compared his DNA to the sample from the crime scene, it was an exact match. Christine's killer had been dead for 5 years. In October 2020, police held a press conference. The officers who'd worked the case for decades stood alongside Christine's surviving relatives as they announced the results. The chief of police said, "This is the moment we've waited 36 years for, and yet it's not the justice we hoped for. The man responsible can no longer be tried, but Christine's story can finally be told truthfully." The announcement brought closure, but not comfort. The Jessop family had spent a lifetime suffering through false accusations, public shame, and unending grief. A little girl's murder, a man's life destroyed. For Christine Jessop, justice arrived 36 years late through science, not vengeance. From Ontario, our story returns to the United States, to the sunlit streets of California, 1982, where another young woman's life was stolen, and where nearly 40 years later, the smallest trace of DNA would speak louder than time itself. Sunnyvale, California, September 3rd, 1982. It was a warm late summer night in the heart of Silicon Valley, a place just beginning to hum with the early rise of technology. 17-year-old Karen Stitt was out with her boyfriend. They were teenagers laughing, carefree, waiting for a bus after a night at a local cafe. When the bus didn't come, her boyfriend walked her part of the way home, stopping at a 7-Eleven near the intersection of Wolf and El Camino Real. They kissed goodnight, and he watched as she started the short walk toward her friend's apartment. It was a distance of just a few hundred feet. Karen never made it. The next morning, a delivery driver noticed something unusual behind a retaining wall near a small concrete footbridge. There, beneath the early sun, was the lifeless body of Karen Stitt. She had been stabbed multiple times, over 60 wounds, and left naked, bound by her own clothing. It was a scene of brutality and rage. Police arrived quickly, but they were already too late. The night had erased the killer's face, leaving behind only small traces of evidence and questions no one could answer. Sunnyvale wasn't used to this kind of violence. Karen was the daughter of a local family, a bright high school student, known for her kindness and curiosity. For her parents, every day after that morning was a quiet ache. They'd drive by that same corner for years, unable to look, yet unable to stay away. The killer had vanished into the night. The case went cold, frozen in time until technology began to thaw it out. Through the 1980s and 1990s, detectives re-examined the case, but every test, every lead, ended the same way: nowhere. They had semen samples from the scene, carefully preserved, but DNA testing was still in its infancy. When the first wave of DNA testing became available in the late 1990s, Investigators tried again, but the databases returned no matches. The killer wasn't in any system. So the case was filed away once more, a silent file in a forgotten cabinet. Fast forward to 2019. Detective Sergeant Brian Paul of the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety decided to reopen the case. He was part of a new generation of detectives who had seen miracles happen through forensic genealogy, where DNA is compared against open-source ancestry databases to find distant relatives of unknown suspects. It was a long shot, but worth it. Using DNA from the preserved evidence, genealogists built a massive family tree. Thousands of names, hundreds of branches. And then one name began to rise to the surface: Gary Jean Ramirez. Ramirez had grown up in Fresno, California. In 1982, he was 27 years old, an Air Force veteran, and living less than 2 hours from Sunnyvale. He had no criminal record, no violent history, and no reason, at least on paper, to be suspected. But when investigators traced his family's genetic markers, the path kept leading back to him. After nearly 40 years of silence, they had a name, but they needed proof. In 2022, detectives quietly traveled to Fresno, where Ramirez had been living a quiet life in a modest home. They collected DNA from items he discarded: a cup, a straw, anything that might contain saliva. When the results came back, the match was exact. The DNA left on Karen Stitt's body in 1982 belonged to Gary Jean Ramirez. The man who had escaped justice for 4 decades was finally caught. In August 2022, police surrounded his home in the early morning hours. Ramirez, now 75 years old, was arrested and charged with murder. When the news broke, Karen's surviving family spoke publicly for the first time in years. Her younger sister said, "Our family has been waiting 40 years for this day. We just wish our parents were here to see it." Her parents had both passed away long before the arrest, taking their grief to the grave, never knowing who killed their daughter. Gary Jean Ramirez was extradited to Santa Clara County, where he awaits trial. He pleaded not guilty, but this time the evidence speaks louder than any denial. 4 decades. A generation born and raised before justice arrived. For Karen Stitt's family, the truth came like a whisper through time, carried by science, delivered too late. The bridge where she was found still stands in Sunnyvale. Commuters cross it every day, unaware that beneath their feet lies the memory of a young woman whose story took 40 years to tell. From California, our path takes us east to Pennsylvania, where another family waited nearly half a century to learn what happened to their daughter. And where justice, once again, came after death. It was just 3 days before Christmas, December 5th, 1975. The air in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, was sharp and cold. Inside a quiet apartment on the second floor of a brick building, 19-year-old Lindy Sue Biechler was wrapping gifts. She'd recently married, worked part-time as a clerk, and was known by everyone as sweet, gentle, and endlessly kind. That evening, her husband, Philip, returned home after visiting relatives. He opened the door and stepped into silence, the kind that tells you instantly something's wrong. In the living room, Lindy Sue lay face down near the Christmas tree. She had been stabbed 19 times. A kitchen knife still protruded from her neck. The crime scene was brutal: blood on the walls, the floor, even on the gifts she had been wrapping moments before her death. Detectives described it as a scene of pure rage. There were signs of a struggle, and one crucial detail: a small blood stain on the door handle, belonging not to Lindy Sue, but to her killer. Police collected the blood sample and preserved it. In 1975, DNA testing didn't exist. But that sample would one day become the key, decades later, to a truth no one could have imagined. Despite hundreds of interviews, police found no clear motive. There were no signs of forced entry, meaning Lindy Sue likely knew her killer. In the months that followed, suspicion bounced from neighbor to friend to even her husband, but every lead fizzled out. Years passed. Her family, especially her aunt, Eleanor Creek, who had been like a second mother to Lindy, refused to give up. Eleanor kept a binder filled with newspaper clippings and police reports, calling detectives every few years, asking if anything new had surfaced. But the answer was always the same. We're still looking. Then came the 1990s and the dawn of DNA science. The sample collected from Lindy Sue's apartment was finally tested. It revealed the profile of a male, but there were no matches in any criminal database. Detectives once again hit a wall. In 2000 and again in 2010, the case was reopened. The evidence was re-examined, retested, and compared against new systems. Still, nothing. For 46 years, the name of Lindy Sue's killer remained buried in silence. Then in 2020, investigators turned to a revolutionary method, genetic genealogy. Using the killer's DNA, they uploaded the profile to an open-source database used by genealogy researchers, the same technology that had helped catch the Golden State Killer. The results produced a complex family tree connected to dozens of people, but one branch led to a surname that stood out: Keene. The investigation zeroed in on a man named David Sinopoli, who had once lived in the same apartment complex as Lindy Sue Biechler in 1975. Sinopoli was an Italian-American man who had lived quietly for decades in Lancaster County. Back in 1975, he had been 19 years old, the same age as Lindy Sue. He wasn't a suspect at the time, had no criminal record, and no one could remember any clear connection between them. But the DNA didn't lie. Investigators tracked Sinopoli to a local airport in 2021. They watched as he sipped coffee, waited for a flight, and then discarded a paper cup. That cup was collected and tested. The DNA was a perfect match to the blood left on Lindy Sue's door handle in 1975. In July 2022, police arrested David Sinopoli, then 68 years old, at his home in Lancaster. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. He had lived a quiet, unassuming life, a husband, a father, a neighbor who waved to people on his street. All the while, the secret of that winter night lay buried inside him. Investigators said they believed he had followed Lindy Sue home, possibly after seeing her earlier that day, and attacked her inside her apartment. There was no apparent motive, just violence and silence. For Lindy Sue's family, the news was both relief and sorrow. Her aunt, Eleanor Crick, was in her 90s when she received the call she had waited nearly half a century for. She told reporters, "I prayed every night for this. I wanted to know before I died. Now I can rest." Lindy's parents, however, never lived to hear the truth. They died decades earlier, never knowing who had taken their daughter's life. In a statement, District Attorney Heather Adams said, "This case reminds us that no matter how much time passes, the pursuit of justice never ends." She was right. Because even when decades go by, even when witnesses fade and memories blur, the smallest trace of blood can hold the voice of truth. The same voice that whispered through Carroll Bonnet's apartment, through Christine Jessop's clothing, through the silence over Karen Stitt's bridge. A voice that outlives the killer, the victim, and even time itself. From Lancaster to California, from the 1970s to the 2020s, one message echoes through them all. Justice doesn't die. It just waits sometimes for years, sometimes for lifetimes, for the moment it's finally heard. But there's one more story that captures that haunting truth better than any other. A case so shocking, so steeped in tragedy, that it became one of the first to prove how DNA can solve what time tried to erase. The final story of our journey, the murder of Peggy Beck, justice found half a century too late. It was August 18, 1963, at the Flying G Ranch in Jefferson County, Colorado. A place meant for summer memories, campfires, crafts, songs under the stars. 16-year-old Margaret Peggy's Beck had been a Girl Scout for years. A quiet girl, a good student, someone who loved the outdoors. That night, she told her tent mates she wasn't feeling well. She moved to sleep in her tent alone. By morning, she still hadn't come out. When the other girls unzipped the canvas flap, they were met with a nightmare no child should ever see. Peggy was found inside, partially unclothed, brutally sexually assaulted, and strangled. The camp was thrown into chaos. Parents raced to the grounds. Investigators searched every tent, every trail, every footprint in the dirt. But in 1963, DNA didn't exist. The evidence they collected, swabs, clothing, hairs, were sealed and stored, waiting for a science that hadn't been invented yet. Detectives interviewed everyone: campers, staff, ranch workers, passing hikers, delivery drivers. They built profile after profile, chased down rumors, interrogated drifters, and nothing. Peggy's file became one of Colorado's oldest and most painful cold cases. Generations of investigators inherited it. Many said it was the one case they couldn't forget. In 2019, 56 years after Peggy's murder, Jefferson County detectives did something no one in 1963 could have imagined. They uploaded the preserved DNA from Peggy's clothing into a genealogy database. And the moment the profile hit the system, it lit up. A family tree emerged: distant cousins, clusters of relatives, lines connecting back decades. And at the heart of it, one man. The DNA pointed investigators to James Raymond Taylor, born in 1939. Taylor worked as a radio and TV repairman. He lived in Colorado around the time of Peggy's murder, and then he vanished. Records show that by 1976, Taylor was living in the Las Vegas area. After that, the trail goes dark. He has not been seen since. In 2019, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office issued an arrest warrant for Taylor, charging him with the rape and murder of Margaret Peggy Beck. But there was a problem. No one knew where he was. Investigators publicly stated that they had no confirmation whether Taylor was alive or dead. They said he could have changed his name. He could have left the country. He could be living quietly somewhere under an alias. Or he could be buried under a name no one knows. The truth is cruel in its ambiguity. Peggy's killer was identified but not found. And so justice, once again, hangs in the air, suspended between possibility and the silence of time. Peggy Beck was only 16, a child at summer camp. Her killer walked among everyday people for years, maybe decades, blending into the world while her family remained frozen in grief. And today, more than 60 years later, investigators still hold out hope. Hope that someone, somewhere remembers him. Hope that a record surfaces. Hope that a forgotten footprint leads them to the truth. Because even though the name has been spoken, the reckoning hasn't arrived. Peggy's story is a chilling reminder that naming a killer is not the same as finding one. Sometimes the truth rises, but justice does not. 7 stories. 7 lives frozen in time. Carroll Bonnet, Pamela Milam, Theresa Fusco, Christine Jessop, Karen Stitt, Lindy Biechler, Peggy Beck. 7 names that once faded into the static of unsolved files until time itself gave them back their voices. Each case decades apart, each one silenced, then resurrected by a few microscopic traces of truth. From basements and bridges to quiet apartments and summer camps, their stories remind us that evil can hide, but it cannot endure. Some killers died believing their secrets were buried, but evidence never forgets. It waits in blood, in dust, in the cold grip of an old photograph whispering, "I remember." These 7 souls never saw the justice they deserved in life. Yet in death, they became something more, proof that truth outlives everything. Science became their voice. Time became their witness. And the investigators who refused to stop listening, they became the hands that pulled justice from the grave. If these stories moved you, remember this: every unsolved case is not a closed book, but a paused sentence. Somewhere, evidence still waits. Somewhere, a name is still unspoken. And maybe one day, someone like you will be the reason it's finally heard. Because justice doesn't die. It sleeps until we wake it. Some say justice delayed is justice denied. But maybe, justice delayed is justice reborn. Because in the end, time didn't protect the guilty, it exposed them. DNA, memory, and persistence became the weapons that outlasted fear. These 7 souls remind us that every fingerprint, every strand of hair, Every untested veal in an evidence box is a promise waiting to be kept. A promise that someone will listen, someone will remember, someone will not give up. We often think death ends the story, but in truth, it only changes the narrator. For Carroll, Pamela, Theresa, Christine, Karen, Lindy, Sue, and Peggy, justice came whispering through the years. Not loud, not triumphant, but steady, like a heartbeat echoing from the past. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. This has been Criminal Minds Archives, where every case is a voice from the dark, and every truth, no matter how long it sleeps, will one day wake.